Hey guys, Into the End here, back with another event video for Company of Exiles. Now I realized that my second video that I uploaded with the New Tomorrow wasn't very satisfying because for one, we never get to cast New Tomorrow, and for two, the deck didn't do particularly well on that run, even though the deck have done a lot better in the other runs that I did, which unfortunately I didn't record. Now, this is the third day of the event. This is Sunday, and I have done the event in a total of maybe over a dozen times. I really like this event. It was really fun for me. Um, and as a result of that, I did quite a few runs, and I did notice a significant shift in the metagame over the course of the 3 days. On day one, it was almost all exclusively aggressive decks, and your deck had to adapt to that. And we ended up playing a very aggressive deck ourselves and did relatively okay. On the second day of the event, when I recorded the last video on the New Tomorrow combo deck, the metagame has slowed down significantly, and throughout that day, I didn't play too many aggro decks, so it was really fine to play a kind of a grindy, ramp, mid-rangey kind of a deck. But on the third day now, I've actually noticed that the metagame, from my experiences anyway, the metagame has sped back up a little bit, and I've actually just lost 2 games to some opponents that straight up burned me out with flash fires, flame blasts, and obliterates, making it really difficult to deal with. They were both Stone Scar decks with Sabotage and Burn, backed up with Burn. Very aggressive early game, a lot of early game cheap effective removal spells to clear the way so that their 1/1s and 2/2s and 3/3s can get in for damage, and then they finish the game off with burn spells that does a lot of damage. And because of the sabotage backup, they often take my backlash, and those decks were really powerful. And I didn't know how to deal with them with a very slow ramp based deck. So I ended up with this final version of the deck for today. I do apologize that this is not exactly like the deck that I posted earlier from yesterday, but I think this is something you have to do if you want to win. You have to adapt, you have to change your deck whenever you see a shift in the meta. And today, from my personal experiences anyway, I've noticed the meta getting more aggressive again. So not as passive as Saturday, not as aggressive as Friday perhaps, but kind of in between. So this is the newest version of the deck. I've just done a run with this deck and finished 6-3. I think we went 5-0 with this deck and then lost 2 games really fast and finally finished the 6-3 record. And I like this deck quite a bit. So let's take a look through. In the end, this is still a deck that wants to have an inevitability so that you can beat any other deck if it goes late enough. And with a New Tomorrow, once you resolve this card, the game is basically instantly over. The great thing about this is that even if your opponent can counter, they can backlash or Aelin's Choice your New Tomorrow, they can't stop the 10 power Scourge of Frostholm from being played. So once you resolve this spell, it really is game over for your opponent. So I do like this inevitability, but this deck does a lot more than that. It doesn't have to play New Tomorrow at all to win. In fact, of all the games that I played, like combined maybe 6 or 7 games with various versions of the New Tomorrow deck, I would say very low percentage of the games I have to cast a spell, maybe 15%, maybe, roughly speaking. And usually you don't need this to win the game. So hopefully today during the videos, I can actually cast it a few times for you guys. But the deck is basically a ramp deck / value deck that looks to go bigger than your opponent by using cards like Zen and Obelisk and Great Parliament. One thing I've learned from playing over a dozen times of this event is that there's a lot of spells that are not worth playing. I see a lot of people play many numbers of echo spells, Find a Ways, Herald Songs, and they're great. They give you more gas in your hand, and in a lot of games when I play, both myself and my opponent will have a lot of cards in our hands at the end of the game. Even when my opponent loses, he could have 8-9 cards in his hand. But what I found is that it doesn't help you when you have 6 or 7 power to play a bunch of 2-mana spells that draws you more cards, and that draws you into more 1 and 2 power spells, because then you end up with a board full of 1 and 2 drops, and then at that point, it's just you're maxed out. You can't go anything higher than 12 units. So at that point, any new additional 1 or 2, 3 drop you put in are not very impactful to the board. So what you really need is you need a way to make your units better. So by either casting bigger spells, playing game-ending spells like New Tomorrow, Crystallize, maybe Harsh Rule to wipe the board away. So an idea of this deck is you have a bunch of very cheap 1 and 2 power spells, and a whole bunch of them with Echo, so you can then get some value early game and clock the board so that you don't die. I think not dying is the first priority. But once you're able to not die, in the mid game, you're going to go over top of your opponent by using Stand Together and Zen and Obelisk. It turns out that when everybody is playing random 1-2 drops and 3 drops, if yours are all 1-1 bigger, 2-2 bigger with Aegis, your opponent can't deal with it. There's a lot of decks that just plays mono removal spells, like the mono black deck is basically just all removal spells to hope to out-tempo you on board and kill you with more units than you do. And once you have a Stand Together on your units, all of a sudden they run out of cards and they lose to you on the board, especially because your units are now bigger than theirs. And Zen and Obelisk basically makes, in the late game, it doesn't matter what your opponent's playing for the most part, as long as all of your units are +2/+2 or maybe +4/+4 bigger than all of their units. It's only a matter of time before you win the game. Assuming you don't lose to anything weird and gimmicky, like your opponent plays, I don't know, something like a Bartholo and then whatever, has ways to pump it. But normally speaking, if your units are bigger than their units, you will end up winning the game. And Crystallize, of course, just finishes the game as soon as you cast it, so it's a very important card. Celestial Omen is just a way for you to find the New Tomorrows, and also, I find in a lot of games, Celestial Omening into Celestial Omens is really powerful, because all you're doing is chaining 6 drops and making 6 power units, and a lot of the 6 power units are quite powerful. And everything else is pretty similar to the previous version of the deck. The notable addition is Water of Life. This card is fantastic. It's basically 2 spells and 2 1/1 units, or 2 1 power units. Gaining a bunch of life throughout the game usually means that you will not die to burn, and that is really important. If you can stabilize, go out of burn range, then this deck will definitely beat the aggressive decks in the late game. And Unstable Form is very, very powerful against the 0 casting cost 3/3 Sand Warriors, because once you Unstable Form it, they're most likely going to be some kind of 1 power unit that has like it's 1/1, 2/1 at best, 2/2 at best. So, and here it is. Lightning Storm is also very good in this deck because of Stand Together. Once you Stand Together your units, a lot of them will survive your own Lightning Storm, making it a pretty good one-sided board wipe. Especially if your opponent is overloading on 1-2 power spells. Like if decks are playing 4 Herald Songs, 4 Unstable Forms, Find a Ways, and that kind of stuff, that gives you a lot of, and like Trailblaze, then a Lightning Storm typically kills more than half of their units, so it's a very powerful spell. And that's pretty much it. This is the current version of the deck. I've done a few runs with this deck. I'm very happy with the current version. Great Parliament, sorry, I forgot to talk about Great Parliament. This card's amazing. It makes 2 units usually in this deck because it ramps so fast, and then it also makes a 4 power unit. Against any deck that looks to 1-for-1 you with removal spells, resolving a Great Parliament usually ends the game because it's going to take them 3 removal spells to beat one of your cards. That's a 3-for-1 card advantage. Not to mention 4/4 flyers are really hard for your opponents to beat when they're getting random units. Flying units in this format wins a lot of games. The times where I do lose, often my opponent just ends up with a bunch of cheap early game flyers that I couldn't answer, and they just chip me to death by the mid game. So, just to recap, I do apologize to the few of you who may be disappointed by my last upload. One of you have commented that, well, first of all, there was a lot of play mistakes, and I do agree with that. I do make a lot of play mistakes, especially when I am recording and trying to commentate and talk at the same time in a very foreign format, where a lot of randomness happens. It takes a lot of processing power on my part to think about it and really come up with the best play. And if I'm talking and trying to analyze it on camera, it's actually really, really difficult. It's easier when I play with established ranked constructed decks because I've played so many games that a lot of the things become instinct and I don't have to actually really process the information, so it's much easier for me to make quick decisions. But in this format, it's actually pretty difficult to deal with a board state that's always going to be unfamiliar to you. So I'm going to apologize in advance if I make play mistakes, and I think I am going to make play mistakes. It's really hard to talk and play this format at the same time. And try to anticipate, because with also fast spells and guessing, because every time someone plays a spell, the spell has an impact. So you're playing around a specific spell, but you're also trying to play around a random unit of that cost. That makes it very difficult to evaluate combat situations. But that's no excuse for making blatant errors. I think I certainly made a few of those. But hopefully today we can get to 7 wins with this deck, and also hopefully we get to play New Tomorrow a few times so you can see the sweet, sweet Scourge of Frostholm being used. All right, thanks for watching, and I'm going to go and record the gameplay separately.